morning. Good morning. The record reflects we are back in session. Parties and counsel are present. All members of our jury and our alternates are present. And Mr. McGee, you may resume with your closing statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, I was alerted yesterday. I was probably yelling at you. I did that for two reasons. One, I'm used to sitting way back there so everybody can hear me. Two, when I started out, I used to mumble a lot. And the court reporters always used to yell at me, "We can't hear you." So I'm going to try and tone it down a little bit today and try and find that happy medium. If you can't hear me, just do that, do something, and I will speak up. If I'm too loud, just do that, and I'll calm it down. I'll try and find that happy ground. A couple things I do want to mention, though. Yesterday, during the people's closing, they made also reference when looking at the pictures from Officer or Deputy Tingley's visit on the 15th that they said the papers were there and the cabinets were there. And so obviously, that's indication that MacGyver was there painting, but no indication that Mr. Merritt was there on the 2nd. As I showed you yesterday during the discussion, or during the testimony of MacGyver, he said he was there on the 2nd. I also want to highlight for you that when Agent Bowles testified, he also said he was there on the 2nd by showing that his cell phone hit at the house. And also he was there on the 3rd because his cell phone hit at the house. So the misrepresentation of what the evidence shows, I just want to keep clarifying when it comes up. I'm going to go on to fact B. I start with fact A. Fact B, that the people are going to have to prove is that he drove down on the night of the 4th to kill the family. Now, what happened on the evening of the 4th? Well, we know that Chase spent time with his family. We watched movies in the clubhouse because remember they didn't have TV in their house at the time. And so they always went to the clubhouse because they had that movie theater there. They had popcorn, had a nice place where they can watch different VHS tapes or DVD tapes, whatever was there. So they used that. How do we know that? Well, you had Kathy Jarvis and Taylor Jarvis both testified to that. And how do you remember that it was the 4th? Well, because we remember the phone call. Kathy remembers the phone call, and that's how they identify the date. I mean, just to say, what happened on August 5th, 2018? What were you doing? I don't know. But if that's your birthday, or something happened, oh, that date we remember, and this is why. That was the last day that they talked to Chase. Or Chase talked to Joseph. It was the last day Joseph called. It's that mark for them. It's that date for them that helps them remember. What were they doing on the 5th, 6th? I don't know. I just can remember the 4th, because that happened. Taylor remembers the arguments about that. See, you can't get a hold of him now. You should have answered that phone call. It's the recollection of that actual conversation. What does that do? That shows he couldn't have been there because we have an alibi of other witnesses. And what the instruction says, if the defendant contends he's not there and he has an alibi, it's not the defense's burden to prove that alibi true. The presumption is the alibi is actually true. And the people must prove it's incorrect or false. The defense does not have to prove he was anywhere else. People must prove he was present. So, we, again, don't have to prove anything. What's the corroboration? They both testified. Now, there was one interesting thing I just wanted to also mention about the lunch on the 4th. I think he said something I could be wrong, I think 17 calls or 14 calls to his wife, how rude. There were 6. Only one connected, and it was 4 minutes long. So a 1-minute phone call, calling back the mother of your children. Is that rude, or is that playing it safe? Because I'm sorry, if I'm out to lunch with somebody and I'm having a meeting, my wife calls, I'm going to call her back. Or I'm going to hear about, why didn't you call me back? So it's polite to your significant other and not being rude to company because they understand. You're eating, hey, you're eating here. I'm going to make a quick call real quick. It's not rude. So the prosecution's theory of the killing is interesting. One, they don't have one. But what they are trying to say is he went off the grid. He turned off his phone so he can drive down to the house and no one will know he's doing it. So when he left Rancho, he knew he was going to kill him. So he just turned off his phone to hide that activity. We're going to talk about how that doesn't match up if we're proving what he did on the 6th because his phone was on. But I'll get to that. When you compare their theory to the other side of that theory, they're going to make no sense whatsoever. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remind you of the testimony I did with Agent Bowles when they started talking about the off-the-grid thing. And I started going through these. I said, I'll just start in January, and all the time his phone just didn't connect when people called him. And I kept going through this. I said, is this enough? Is this enough? Am I made my point now yet, Agent Bowles? And I kept doing this over and over and over. I mean, look at these large gaps. I guess he's out killing people all the time. Or he just got a crappy phone. It happens all the time on his cell phone records. They act like this is an anomaly. It's a common occurrence. So, he went down on the 4th to kill him with a plan. Obviously, he turned off his phone. And he himself is able to corral 4 people and kill them without leaving any evidence in the house. A husband and wife and 2 toddlers can be corralled by one person with no noise, no screams, no signs of violence. This is their theory. Their theory is he killed him in the house, but they don't have evidence of it. After reviewing the San Diego's investigation, all the reports and photographs, and you returning to the house and doing your test, is there anything in that house that you have found, you have read, or you have seen that tells you those murders happened in the Fallbrook house? In totality? In totality, everything is...
In totality, I believe the date occurred in the house.
That's not my question. I didn't ask what you believe. I said, did you see any evidence that showed you that the crime happened in that house?
No.
But you believe it did?
Yes.
You notice his face didn't move, Sergeant Steers. Sometimes the camera was faced towards something different, so I didn't want to show what's different. I wanted to identify who's talking, so that's why you see that. So, killed in the house. Evidence? Your own detective. No, there's no evidence of this. But we don't need that. Then he disposed of the bodies on the 6th. Well, where were the bodies during this time? Were they in the house? If they're in the house, then you have pooling of blood. You have blood everywhere. Were they in his truck? When he's going to have him driving all over town with 4 dead bodies in the back. That doesn't make any sense. None of the theory makes sense. Now, one thing that's interesting also about the problem with their theory that he drove down and killed him on the 4th is the vehicle that was in the driveway, and we'll get to that. The vehicle that was in the driveway left at 7:47 and left. But we have computer activity at 8:05 and a phone call from Joseph's cell from the area of the house at 8:28. So, if the killing's done and left, why is there still activity in the house? Unless they weren't dead. Unless the vehicle that's really pulling out of that driveway had nothing to do with the murder. That's just somebody pulling out of their driveway. You assume the murder happened then, but no. If that was a vehicle, let's say my client's vehicle pulling in, then you'd see it backing into the driveway. Because Miss Mitchley said, I watched it for hours. And she pulled out all the times vehicles were seen. So, you don't even have him pulling in. So we have the Mitchley video. This exhibit was done by Mr. Stutchman, who shows both videos set up together. And you have the vehicle pulling out. And you clearly see the taillight. You can see it on the left. And you can see it on the right. We're not stupid. That's the taillight. Okay? Dr. Rudin did a good fusion of the daytime with the car driving over it. Taillight. What's interesting about this one, though, is they made reference to the reflection off of the little spot, the plate on the ground, and on the fire hydrant. Well, see, stuff doesn't need to be reflective to reflect the light. Yes, but there's light all around it, and you have a clear light source. Versus where's the light source for this? It would hit that hydrant, it would hit that tree. And remember, with the camera being up high coming down, it would have to be where the curb is. And it would hit, that's Mr. Merritt's truck, it would hit the other latch up front, which it doesn't. Then we have the Faro scan that Dr. Rudin did. He was doing his weird measurements from the marker light. just to show it doesn't work. But I like this because it's interesting. You can see the headlights clearly. Headlights clearly. You can see the running light clearly. No running light. See the bumper? Bumper. There's no running light. That has to be there. It's missing. Even the Sheriff's Department analysis. They're saying you can see this box that's not there, but where's this? It would be sticking out to here. Their own pictures, their own comparisons. It's missing. That's a characteristic that's missing. That's exclusion. It's not his vehicle. Now, this is where it kind of got funny, is until February 19th in this trial of this year, the government's opinion was that light is the rear marker light of his truck. They put it in their reports. They testified to it at the preliminary hearing. And Dr. Rudin had that in his reports. Their expert that they had for 4 years. You hear about this 402 hearing that happened on the 5th. And all the cross-examination that Mr. Imes did of Mr. Rudin, he plagiarized my questions. Because that's exactly what I did to Dr. Rudin. Nothing you're saying making sense because that marker light can't fit. And he said, wait a minute. And he went back. And he looked at it again. Mr. McKee's right. It can't be that marker light. Mr. Imes, it's not his truck. Go away. That was February 15th when he told him that. February 19th, you remember from the testimony, is when Mr. Licio was retained. 4 days later. We have a problem. Our whole theory that we've sold this whole time is wrong. So let's make up a new theory. Mr. Licio, how much would it cost you to say a light's not a light? 14 grand. Okay, well that's what I need you to come in and say. I need you to come in and say, this light is not a light, it's a reflection from an unknown light source. No problem. CalCrim 332 tells you when you're analyzing experts how to compare them all. If you don't like what they say and you think it's unreasonable, you're allowed to disregard it and throw it out and say, no, he's just wrong. Just because he's an expert, you don't have to believe him. Law says you can get rid of him, get rid of him. Now, one of the things that Mr. Licio did is he says, well, let's put circles around the headlights. And that's how he circled the headlights. They weren't perfect. They weren't data points like everybody else does. And he still said that was 7 inches off. Sir, is that really reasonable error? Well, 7 inches isn't a lot. We're talking 30, 40 inches here. That's 20, 25% off. But no, I'm not worried about that. And again, he's circling headlights and only the headlights. He's not including the running lights because they didn't tell him, psst, hey, you better include the running lights because those are always on. He messed up on that too. Then you saw during the People's Closing Exhibit 796 where everything's just glared out. They doctored that photograph. Because that's not what it looked like here. You could see a clear distinction between the two. You could see the dark lines here. And this is from their report. They doctored evidence to sell their story. That's desperate. And another thing here, too, that I found interesting is, again, where's the light source, which I kind of covered. Don't know where this light source is that's hitting that. And remember, he took my flashlight. was going to bring it again, and I forgot. He took my flashlight and said, well, if you just stick it on the wall there, then nothing else is shined. This car's moving. It's moving at approximately this speed. And you got to keep a flashlight on that exact same spot the entire time without moving an inch. And hitting nothing else. And not knowing where it came from. And reflections change depending on the angle. We all know that. So if this car's moving and its side's moving, that light source has got to be swinging across the neighborhood to keep that same reflection hitting this light. No explanation where it came from. Total nonsense. Dr. Rudin showed that the lights are at the same height as the headlight, also illuminating the rear marker. He also said it's at the same plane as the latches, which is correct, which it means if they're both all at the same plane, if one hits, they both would. Remember we had this, where I said they're both facing the same way? And Mr. Stutchman highlighted that with 1099, that even the reflection is not hitting the latch, because you can see it there below the dark spot. So it's hitting here. It's not even hitting the latch. Talk about square peg in a round hole. All this is nonsense. All nonsense. And remember, I asked Mr. Licio, if that's not a latch and it's a light, then my client's truck's excluded. Well, I don't know what it is. Sir, if it's a light, is his truck excluded? I don't know what it is. Sir, I asked him like 6 times. He refused to admit, because he was paid to never admit, that his truck could be excluded. And then all his testimony, does he tell you it's his truck? No. He says, I can't say if it is or it is not. That's the best he could say. So the best they have is, I don't know. Even though we had Mr. Stutchman say it's not his truck, and Dr. Rudin, their expert, say, no, that's not his truck. He did it not only by the reprojection, but also this forced geometry. Yeah, it's called photogrammetry, where you measure everything and said, well, the length A to B is too long in the model versus the video. So Mr. Merritt's truck's too long. It's too long from here to here, and that extra length shows there's no box on the front of the one in the video. Then from here to here it's too long, but also the width is too narrow. So the vehicle in here is shorter and wider than Mr. Merritt's truck. Call me crazy, that's exclusion. So, it's not his truck that drove down. You're done. Oh, that's right.
Sorry about that.
So if it's not his truck, you're done. You are done. So we don't have him driving down there. We don't have him fired. No motive and no opportunity. You can literally walk in and say, yeah, they didn't prove it. We can go home now. Now remember, for their theory to stick, also, Chase goes home, he'd be covered in blood. Impact causes blood spatter, covered in blood. Nobody says anything about him being covered in blood. The bodies, where are they? In the truck? Already covered that. In the house? I already covered that. Where's the blood evidence to support it? He went down there and took checks on the 4th, right? How come there's no blood on the checks? You take a shower beforehand, make sure you got everything off. One thing that I found interesting was at some point it was mentioned, I don't remember if it was opening or closing, that the checks were seen in the office before the search. No, they weren't. For the search, this was taken on the 15th. You can see that they're all painting. There's papers around, there's drawers out, so apparently there's a killing and all this blood would have got over, not on the paper of the drawers. And this is the state of the house when they went in on the 15th. This is the state of the office before Michael McStay took the computers. And what became interesting in this photograph here is this here's the little child's chair that they sit on. Child's chairs on that computer. The computer that had all the dinosaur lookups and everything. The child liked to work in the office with the father. Anybody have kids? Kids like to mimic their parents. So sure, son, we'll set you up here. You can be just like daddy. So all the things that are looked up on this computer, that's the kid's computer. There are no checks on that chair. It's not where he kept them. So the child worked. From the search, there's no box of checks anywhere. I called up Agent Quick because he's the one that searched. These were the picture taken by Dennis Williams. She says, all I did is snap, 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 and walk through the house before anybody went in. She says, I have to document before and after. These are before. Did the documentation. Agent Quick was one that went in. He went in, he says, oh, the large bottom drawer was locked. I had to break that lock, or pick the lock, and get inside the drawer. What was there? I don't remember. Well, the notes say it was just empty folders. Notes could be wrong. Why would you lock a drawer that has nothing in it? Before, that chair was over there. This box was folded this way. They broke it open to see what's inside. And then they put the checks on that red chair afterwards. Look at the size of these boxes. Easily fit in that large bottom drawer of a desk. The one thing you'll secure in an office is your checks. It's the only thing you can secure in that office is those checks. Unless you have cash, there's no cash found. Makes sense. You're allowed to use your common sense and say that makes more sense. The next thing they said is this call here shows he was driving home that evening. And the testimony of Agent Bowles wasn't recorded, so I don't have anything to play for you. They weren't here for recordings, unfortunately. So I just pulled the testimony up. And what we talked about here was, first we talked about this call that happened on the 10th, where at 12:17 in the afternoon, Chase calls Kathy, and it pings right here next to his apartment. 12:18, pings down here, Riverside. And it's like, okay, you know where that is, right? Yes. Can you get from there to there that quickly? No. Can you explain that? He said it's a flyer. They happen. That's what he called it. It's a flyer. He says, line of sight, it will sometimes pick up just weird cell towers. We don't know why. It just does. So I said, well, what's the azimuth of that 340? show 340 from this point to the house. And he did. That's why he drew that line and he marked it there. And after doing that, I had him explain this call that was at 9:32 on the 4th. He says that same azimuth is at 340. So, it's traveling along the same line? Yeah. Is there any obstruction between that cell tower and the apartment? Not that I saw. Is it reasonable it could be a flyer? Yeah, could be. Yeah. So the family's saying he was home. And he wasn't driving down there. People weren't killed that night. And he was home. And another flyer. Same direction. Exact direction. It's amazing. I wasn't even expecting to line up that well. So, the family was not killed on the 4th. None of the evidence shows that. What the evidence does show is they survived to the morning of the 5th. Because we have the vehicle leaving and there's still activity in the house. Let's see. The clothes they were wearing when they were found in the grave is important. Sweatpants, bra, robe on summer. No shoes. Joseph, shorts and t-shirt. No, we're talking February. No shoes. Gianni, shorts and his backpack. Carry that thing around like a security blanket. And Joseph Jr., we don't have anything. The clothes that they're wearing are clothes you would sleep in. And when you get up in the morning, you're still running around in your sleeping clothes. What was the food that was out? Eggs. Both cracked and uncracked. I love breakfast. I eat breakfast at lunch. I'll eat breakfast at dinner. I do it all the time. Okay. Yes, that happens. But let's look at what's reasonable. It's logical. They ate breakfast that morning because they also had coffee. You're not going to drink coffee at night before you go to sleep. You're drinking coffee in the morning when you're waking up. There was actually a coffee cup on the table on the 15th. There's popcorn and fruit, snacks to kind of keep the kids happy while they're making breakfast. What else was going on at the time? Well, they needed to finish that painting of the kitchen. Summer is, really want to get that painting done. So what does she do? She starts painting. She is painting at the time. And you don't paint at night to a couple lights. I always paint at sunlight. If you ever painted, you always get paint during the day. And the last important thing, the dogs were outside. The dogs slept indoors. You had the big doggy bed in the bedroom with them. You had the small doggy bed in the laundry room where the puppy slept. They slept indoors at night. What do you do when you wake up in the morning and you have dogs that have been in all day or all night? You let them out. So they can go to the bathroom. Early morning. It explains why Bear, the 100-plus pound dog, wasn't involved, because I don't care if you know a dog or not. That dog latches on to one person. One person. That was Summer. If anybody hurts Summer, a dog will attack. He was outside. So, if they're being attacked on the morning of the 5th, and when I say they're being attacked, I think they're being kidnapped by multiple people. And, excuse me, has to be multiple people. Because how do you control that many people? You need at least 3. At least. So you pull them out. And you take it. Now, if this is happening on the morning of the 5th, we know where Mr. Merritt is. He's in Upland on his phone at 7 a.m. He's on his way to LA. This is Friday. Early morning to get ahead of traffic. You're going out there. Why? Because you're working on supplies. Calls his voicemail, and then he calls Kathy. He calls Joseph. What, probably let him know, found what we needed. And he goes back home and he calls Joseph twice and Kathy 3 times. Now, he also returns home and writes checks. And backdates them to the 4th, because that's the date that he was given the checks during the meeting. That was the day he was given instruction by Joseph to write those checks. And he's calling him to let him know he did it. Now, how do I know that? Well, when we get to the date of his interview, I'll play where he said it in his interview. So, Chase is working on the fountains. The family's taken on the 5th. They're not murdered in the house. There's no sign of a murder. But they are taken in the clothes they were wearing. When were they killed? What day were they killed? We don't know. No evidence can tell you that. We can tell you when they were killed by. Approximately noon on February 12th. I showed you that overhead photograph, which I'll get to. So they were buried by the 12th. They were taken on the morning of the 5th. The prosecution says, well, they were buried on the 6th. Well, why do you say they're buried on the 6th? Well, because Mr. Merritt's phone is in Victorville on the 6th. Okay. Well, how do you know Mr. Merritt's involved? Well, because his cell phone is in the area on the day they were buried. Wait. How do you know then they were buried on that day to link up his cell phone to it? Well, because his cell phone was there. It's circular logic. Any logic class will tell you that's not proper. You can't do it that way. You have to have some independent notion of what day links it to the 6th. They don't have that. Let's go through, well, let's see how I worked it out. There was the rain report, and there was the tracks that are at the grave. And the tracks show two vehicles pulling in. 76 inches, 73 inches. It's two vehicles. That means at least two people. If Summer and the kids are still alive when they're brought in one vehicle, then you need somebody driving, you need somebody controlling them. So it's three people, at least. So you got these tire tracks going into the desert, and you went to the desert. And it was important for you to see not only the scenery, but to see the dirt. When you walked around that dirt, it was firm but soft. It wasn't hard packed, but it wasn't like the beach. It was an in-between. Had rocks, bigger incised rocks mixed in with the sand and loose dirt, and you guys got a feel for it. And we know it rained on the 6th, and I called CHP Officer Adele because, well, I needed to make sure that we knew it was started raining early. Nothing about he couldn't get it to pass. It was raining early. There's accidents all over the freeway. Shows the weather conditions. And, they're saying, well, Chase is the only one connected to Victorville, so he's got to do it, because nobody else knows about Victorville and knows where it is, I guess. We'll get to what Dr. Gray says about that. But let me explain why their whole theory doesn't really match up. Let's start with the cell phone records. Cell phone records show that he was in Victorville. And that's it. Can't get any more precise than that. Sorry. So we have Agent Bowles. I asked him about the first phone call at 10:46. What's it indicate? It indicates here's the starting call, cell tower, here's the ending tower azimuth. What's that tell you? It means he's within the range of those two. Is he moving or not? He could be stationary. So right here. The bodies are way up north of the map. They're not on the map yet. So he's on the south end of Victorville, stopped, or gone. Then the calls from 11:30 to 11:52, when apparently he's supposed to be digging holes. And we'll hear probably raping and killing him at the scene. He has 22 minutes to drive out there. But the problem is these calls go between the cell tower to the right and cell tower to the north. So since it's in both, they have to be in range of both. So I asked Agent Bolts, what's this show? Shows between 11:30 and 52. There was a series of calls that I believe, all but one, originated at the sector of 85, which is east, and then many of those terminated in the sector of 10 degrees. One of them started at the 10 degrees. And with the approximate coverage rate of 120 degrees per sector that overlaps those two, that's where you'd expect to see all those calls occurring. Would be in that coverage area for those two. The grave is down here at the blue spot. He's not even at the grave. Would it be reasonable to conclude at this point then that the cell tower would have been within the yellow area that's overlapping those sectors of that one tower? Yes. It's a possibility that the phone existed in that area where the coverage from both sectors. Sir, it's reasonable. It's not certain though, right? It's not certain, but it is reasonable. Remember the whole circumstantial evidence. There's a reasonable interpretation that points to innocence. You must accept it. Their own expert, FBI agent Kevin Bowles, who had no reason to help the defense, says, yeah, it's reasonable. He wasn't at the grave. Can you say with any certainty where the phone was? Not with this type of analysis. No. You cannot say where that phone was. And an interesting thing is if he was at the gravesite, and I had him draw this out, what that other azimuth on that tower, that 170 azimuth, where that is, that actually crosses into the gravesite. So if the phone was at the gravesite, it wouldn't be pinging up at this azimuth 10, it'd be pinging down on the 170. So clearly, the phone was north and not at the gravesite. I asked him about the 11:52 call that also happened. This one was kind of weird. The start time was the one there. The total call time was 35 seconds. And changes towers from the beginning to the end to the initiating one. Does that conclude that it was moving? I mean, based on the end tower being way down here, past all these other towers, it's likely the phone moved, at least enough to where the coverage for the secondary tower. So the phone's moving. Driving. Not staying still, digging holes. Killing people. Is it fair to say, or is it a reasonable thing to say, that the 11:51 call being the initiating tower at this sector, and again, he starts at that same tower he ended at, shown this exhibit that the phone's likely in close proximity to the tower, he's like, all I'm going to say is that it's within the coverage area. I was looking for these notes where I had these. This call here, at 10:46, who's he calling? Kathy. These calls here, who's he calling? Kathy and Taylor. Can't get a hold of Kathy, let's call Taylor. This call here, he's calling Kathy again. This call here, he calls Taylor. Starts at that same tower downtown. It ends at the one across the way. And I asked him, what about that terminating cell tower? Well, it's an elevated tower, I guess, on the hillside on the side of the mountain, I believe. My memory serves me correct. I believe it's about 2,700 feet elevation. For the valley floor, he thinks it's about 1,700. It's about 1,000 feet up. It's a coverage tower. So it's an elevated coverage tower? Yes, similar to the one at the Oro Grande Tower, the tower next to the gravesite. It's a coverage tower. It's high to help give coverage to the desert. It picks up all the calls throughout the desert. It's way over there. How far away is it? 10 miles. Again, a call to Kathy at 12:49. This one, the starting tower, is here, which is downtown Victorville, pointing towards Victorville. This one is the ending tower, pointing more towards Victorville. Would it be reasonable to conclude that during this time it's somewhere in the city of Victorville? Yeah, it's reasonable. 1:30 call, again back to the tower that's overviews the whole valley. Then the end is way down here at the far bottom of the map at the south end. Looks like he's driving back home, right? Again, he's calling Kathy. In it. Those are all of them. And I asked him, based on all the data showing all the calls and all the towers, where they hit, is it reasonable to conclude that between 10:46 and 1:30, cell phone, is it reasonable to say it was moving? Yes. I would say very reasonable to say that the cell phone moved, maybe not constant fashion, but periodically throughout that time period. It was always moving. It's fair to say with just this limited information you have that you could too speculative to pinpoint a phone? Correct. Fair to conclude that the only reasonable opinion or conclusion you could make about this data is that the cell phone was in the high desert area? Yes, I believe that's fair assessment. Anything more detailed than that? No. I mean, you get a general idea, but they're in the high desert, nothing more precise. That's all he could say. He's not going to overstate it. He's not going to do any favors for the government. He's going to tell it like it is. You have a cell phone that's in Victorville area moving. That's all you have. So again, on the 4th, he apparently wants to go off the grid when he's doing stuff illegal. When he's going to kill. But when he's burying them, he's going to keep his phone on, not only in case somebody calls him, God forbid, when he's in the middle of doing something illegal, but no, he calls. He's the one calling. He's calling Kathy and his eldest child, Taylor. If you're in the desert burying bodies, you're not calling anybody. You can keep your phone off, right? That's the theory. He's a mastermind. He knows you can trace his phone. But in this time, no, that's not what he does. Their theories contradict themselves. They're not making any sense with what they're saying. Now, how do we even know they were buried on the 6th? Well, I told you the circular reason logic that, well, because that's when Chase is in the desert. Yeah. Tracks in the dirt. Those indicate something. They indicate damp, wet soil. Right? Makes sense to everybody. They just aren't made. No, those are deep. Those are everlasting. There's something going on. Well, we know it rained that day, on the 6th. We know that because we had the no law report. Ryan Smith testified to it.
On the 6th, February 6th, which is in the middle of the page here, there was approximately 1.1 inches of rain, and then on the 7th there was rain on the recorded inches.
That inch or so that was reported on February 6th of 2010. What was your time span of familiarity with so inch a lot in the desert in 24 hour period?
Yes.
This is a lot of rain. A lot of rain. So, you ever tried digging a hole? It could be, it's not that bad. You ever tried digging a hole in the rain? You never do. Why? Because the mud in the water keeps sloshing in. You never dig an actual hole. You ever dig a hole at the beach? We all done that when we were kids, right? You get a hole up, all of a sudden the water comes in, fills it all back in, the sand all runs back down. You don't get to dig a hole when it's in the rain. What's even harder is covering it up in the rain. Everything's wet. The water's still coming down because it's a lot of rain. So you have these bodies in there and you got to cover them up, and it's not deep. The dirt's just barely going to cover them. You got to pat it down. Well, you can't do that if it's wet. You can't do that if the water keeps coming in. The mud will wash away. The dirt will wash away. The bodies will never be able to be covered. If they tried to do it that time, there would not be 4 bodies left. They would have been, the dirt would have been too shallow. There would have been animal activity on all of them. It was dry enough, no rain, to where they can pile the dirt on top of the bodies and protect them somewhat from animal activity. Well, so you need rain to make the tracks, but you need it to be dry. So were they buried on the 7th? Or the 8th? So the ground is still wet, where the tracks are made, but you can still bury them. That makes more sense. At first I kept thinking, They were probably kidnapped on the 5th and buried on the 5th. But you need that soil for the tire tracks. 7th makes more sense. Or later. So the tracks show there was 2 vehicles. Here's the overhead that was taken on February 12th at around noon. Here's the grave B, grave A. Clip of that I showed you during the opening, so you can see the tire tracks more clearly. You can see the overturned dirt. What's interesting is how the dirt's kind of white and dried out, except for the tracks are darker, as if the tracks went back through to a level of moisture that wasn't on the top. And the dirt was a different color than the rest, showing it's turned over dirt. It's not the same. But you can also kind of see the tire tracks. Bless you. One backing in, one pulling in straight. And they don't match. So that's 2 vehicles. 2 vehicles excludes Chase. Now, if some are still alive, that makes 3 people. Because you need 1 to drive, 1 to control. Lo and behold, I said this, I didn't know what the DNA result's going to be. We didn't get them until January. It's 3 people's DNA. Separate DNA. Matches. Matches the scenario you would have to transport those bodies of the McStay family. 3 actors, 2 vehicles, killing 4 people. Now, government might try to argue, yes, okay, there's multiple people, but Chase was one of them. That doesn't work. The reason that doesn't work is because, well, first, their theory is he got fired, which we know he didn't, and he got upset right then and drove down to kill him. And he had to drive quick because the call was at 5:48. The video starts at 7. Don't see his vehicle pulling in. He's got an hour and 12 minutes. So he's got to go find help to help kill him. And he has to do it without having to drive over without giving a heads up because there's no phone calls. No. They tore apart his life. They know everybody he called, everybody he contacted, everywhere he spent his money, where he drove. They showed you all that. Did they ever show you him contacting somebody else that would help him? No. He had very few people he talked to in his life. Kathy, his kids, Joseph, and people for work. That's it. Chase doesn't have a lot of friends. Well, you may not need friends, right? Well, I'll get to that. I'll go back to that. Remember they had the wiretap too, to listen to him talk when he didn't know he was being listened to. And they kept prodding him to get him to talk. He never called anybody, hey, I'm not going to mention anything about you, don't say anything. Hey, they might be on to us. Hey, we need to meet. They don't have any of that. They listen to all his phone calls. Again, no coordinating with anybody. So the second thing, if you don't have friends, well, you just pay them. Right? How much would it cost for somebody to kill a family of 4? I don't know. But what they did establish is that he had no money. He was broke. He lived paycheck to paycheck like 78% of this country. At the end of every month, he had 0 balance after paying, rent and everything. He had no extra money to pay for anybody. So, How could it be him if it takes multiple people? Can't be. So also, well, Chase is the only one that knew the area. Yeah, they made that argument, and then they called Dr. Gray as the anthropologist to put all the bones together. And just by chance, Dr. Gray talked about
How many times have you been there in Charles Ray?
the area.
Oh, at least a dozen, probably more.
And these are all, forensic, measures on your part?
No, we have forensic interest. Some people decided that that was just the ideal place to end things. So the suicide in that location, a significant death or misadventure. Fellow who walked away from his broken ATV and we saw him alive again.
So is it safe to say Stoddard Road is a common place where bodies are found?
It is as common as many other places along the 15.
You could think back to movies like Casino, or any of the old movies, gangster movies, murder movies. You always hear, let's go dump bodies in the desert. That's a common idea. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out a good place to dispose of a body is in the desert. And this family of four, Joseph and Summer, Gianni and Joseph Jr., were deposited in the first desert spot that they saw. First road after civilization. You don't have to know it. If you knew it, you would go probably to a better place. Not right next to the freeway where you're sitting there. The freeway's driving right there. That doesn't make any sense for somebody who knows the area. It's common. She's been there many a time. So what does the crime scene tell us about the gravesite? What's that tell us what happened? Because again, we focused on the actual evidence to try and figure out what occurred. So we know Joseph McStay was wrapped up in the blanket with the cables wrapping around him. What's that tell you? Well, forensically, that tells you he was probably killed somewhere else, wrapped up, and brought there. Just makes sense. Easier to transport that way, less of a mess, easier to pick up. He was killed elsewhere and transported there in the one vehicle. What about Summer and the kids? Well, Summer and the kids were not wrapped up like that. Summer, unfortunately, had her sweatpants and panties were not on her body. They were balled up near her head. What's that tell you? That tells you that she was raped. What is something about that circumstance is she fought. She fought for her life. And how do you know that? Fractured jaw. They hit her in the face with a sledgehammer when she was resisting the rape. She had a bra on. So they had a knife there because they cut it off. Here's one cut found inside the grave and the one cut found outside. The fact that one's inside and one's outside shows they weren't deposited at the same time. They were pulled off while they're at the scene. The fact that they pulled off this bra that still had paint on it is probably where you got the paint transfer onto the hammer. all that wet paint onto that hammer. Shows it happened at the gravesite. What we do know is that when they were taken from the house, they do have to be controlled. What's the easy way to control somebody is bind them. So what they bind them with? The blue tape. It's right there on the counter. That explains the blue tape. Tying up their arms. It's not going to be strong enough to where they can't break it. Who knows? Maybe they could, maybe they can't, but it's at least some amount of control. So, this all happened to the McStay family. Who did it? We all feel for what that family went through. And we wanted answers. I just didn't want to defend my client and say they don't have it. I said, let's give this family answers.
Objection, improper vouching.
So, let's do DNA analysis of the grave. Now that's risky. Because you have to be certain your client wasn't involved before you do that. Because if the proof comes up that he did it because you developed it, whew, you're in trouble. But I was confident, based on the evidence that I'm seeing, their story doesn't make sense. This is multiple people. This is happening on days when my client's accounted for. I don't have to take my client's word. The evidence says he didn't do it, so let's do these tests. Let's find out what happened. And we did. And amazingly, I mean, we went in with low expectations. So what do we test? We test the things that the killer would have touched. And we tried the straps, we tried the cloth, we tried those different things with nooks and crannies. We talked about the sledgehammer. We didn't like the idea. We didn't think we'd see anything there. They had already tested it. And we're like, let's stick to the things that we like. And we did. And lo and behold,
Objection, improper argument,
Sustained.
vouching.
Sustained.
Admonish the jury, please.
lo and behold, we had hits. And we knew that there was evidence there because Don Jones found some human DNA. So you heard from Susanna Ryan, who talked about the different process that she used to collect and process the items and what they used. 20 times, 200 times more sensitive, who knows? It's worth trying. It's a different technique than the swab technique they tried. The funny thing is the technique we use, the government has that same NBAC. We showed you to. They bought it. They just don't use it. Why? Because they don't know how. Their DNA team at the crime lab in San Bernardino is a part-time retiree. So he testified to. He's the DNA team. Part-time retiree.
Objection, misstates his testimony.
But what about the MVAC? Yeah, we're working on procedures for that, meaning he is. I tried it a couple years ago. I have a lot of contaminants. Well, I'll have to get back to that. It's one of my projects I'll have to get back to. The state of San Bernardino crime lab is appalling on DNA. Well, since defense found this evidence, it should be excluded. right? Mr. Imes argued. Flies in the face of science. He said that Bodie said there was no results. Again, misrepresentation. Bodie Selmark, you heard from Ms. Nash. There was results. There was actually results above the stochastic level for them. And there was actually alleles that were distinct from the victims and the defendant. And I asked her, can you draw a conclusion from that? That's where she said, no. Our guidelines do not allow me to draw a conclusion from what I see. And I said, what if I ask pretty please? You remember that? She kind of laughed at me. She says, you can do it all you want. I can't do it. But the fact that it's distinct from everybody else, I don't care. I cannot draw a conclusion. So we went to cybergenetics to use true allele. And as Dr. Perlin testified, he didn't choose to testify so he can sell a product. We called the witness we wanted to call. And we called Dr. Perlin. Why? Clear he knows true allele. He knows the science. He knows his testimony. He says we testify for the government 90% of our time. He just testified for the DA in a capital case. He had the contract for Kern County DA's office for all their DNA analysis. So apparently, this flies in the face of science message didn't reach Riverside and Kern because they use it. So when it's good for the government, it's good science. When it's used by the defense, it's bad. Remember the whole comment too about, oh, the cord was sticking out. I showed him the picture of the cord sticking out, and he gasped. No. What it was is objected as to foundation because we don't know what cord he tested, because when the crime lab and the crime scene specialist took the cord off, they didn't identify where they got it from. Sustained. They did a poor job in identifying what they were doing. And they want to try and use that against our witness. It's gall. That's gall. What the conclusion was is the DNA in the grave is excluded from the McStay family and Mr. Merritt. It's not their DNA. It's touch DNA that was on those items by somebody handling it before it went into the grave. It's not contamination after, because then you would see more DNA and less of that slope. Christina Nash said that, and Dr. Perlin said that. This is DNA that went into the ground. When did it get put on there? I don't know. Could have been from the people killing. Could have been somebody that handled that item 10 years before. Who knows? We don't know. But what's a good indication of what it is? The people that tied the family up. The people that raped Summer. The DNA suggests we have the 3 people that were involved. Now, it's ridiculous because the victim's DNA wasn't on there. And it was Mr. Doherty who questioned Mr. Perlin about that. And Mr. Perlin, a medical doctor from a top school and a licensed physician, says, well, there's decomposition. You want me to talk about that? Yeah, I know all about it. Okay, well, explain it. Well, when those bodies were decomposing, all their DNA was dissolved by enzymes and bacteria. I would not expect to see their DNA Well, what about the touch DNA? How'd that survive? Only thing that would have survived is anything that did not get dissolved in that decomposition fluid. So what happened? We got lucky. That just a small amount somewhere on those cords, we don't know where, something came back and it survived. But we have something. That there tells you Merritt didn't do it. Add on, he had no reason to because he wasn't fired. He didn't drive down the house to get him. He wasn't at the gravesite. But the evidence in the grave says it's not him. If that's not reasonable doubt, I don't know what is. I don't know where you go from there. I really don't. Remember, we don't have to prove anything to you. We could have sat there and played cards. But we tried to give you answers that the government wasn't giving you. We wanted to talk about the murder. And give you something to say, I know kind of how these people were killed. I don't know who, but we have some clues, but we do know it wasn't Mr. Merritt. So when you return a verdict of not guilty, you sleep at night going, yeah, they got the wrong guy. Next thing I want to go into is more of the work of Dr. C, but I think the court wants to take a recess.
Yeah, I was
This is
just
a
going
good
to say
spot.
this would be a good time to go ahead and take our morning recess, about 15 minutes. Keep in mind the admonitions previously given to you, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case, and we'll see everyone back in about 15 minutes.